Digilogue fam, is your boy Drew. How are y'all doing? Super appreciative of all the support for all the content, all the things that we're programming every week. We just want to thank you. We're here for you guys in terms of resources during COVID. More importantly, we're excited today. We have episode 13 of the L's, aka Lessons Learned, with my boy Chris Blackwell. Chris, what's going on? How's LA?
What's happening? LA is LA. I mean, I can tell you about the inside of my apartment. I can't tell you much about what's happening in LA.
Before we start, I have to say, man, that background, that Keith Haring background is fire. Because I'm sure your Zoom meetings must be popping because I've seen some interesting backgrounds.
Yeah, you know what inspired me is because I always wanted to have this wall, but then when we started doing the Zooms, I kept on seeing all the same bullshit backgrounds and all the green around where people were cut out and all that. I'm like, all right, if I'm gonna do it, I want to have the best background in the game.
It's so crazy. Like even for me, I had to step it up. So
you got the gold single plaque. I see you.
I appreciate it, man. You know, I had to put together a corner of my office and just literally make this like the Zoom for all our podcasts and our panels and
Be
stuff.
Professional.
Yeah, I'm learning from all these content creators.
You're doing a great job. I love what you're doing over there, man.
Appreciate it. So just for context for our audience, maybe introduce what you do now, your current role. Just for context, you're at Republic Records, but introduce your role and some of the things you're working on at Republic.
Yeah, so I'm the SVP of Creative Content and Development at Republic Records. So it's kind of like a free-ranging role, but I mean, for the most part, it's kind of two-pronged right now. I mean, my day-to-day is mostly developing film and TV projects, utilizing our artists, so kind of being the middleman between traditional Hollywood, where these networks, whether it be Netflix, MTV, HBO, aren't really used to talking to labels, because usually when they talk to labels, the only thing they want to know is like, can you give us cheaper syncs, cheaper licensing, all that stuff? Because typically there just isn't people who have that skill set. So what I do is I have my monthly meetings with the buyers. I see what type of content they're looking for. Then I look at the artists on our roster and see, and I work with people on the roster too, but just see what type of content the artists want to do and kind of like explain to them that like, look, if you're doing these premium, whether it's scripted or unscripted, these premium projects are a lot more intense than a 2-hour Genius Verified shoot. So just see if they're ready for prime time. And then I will find like a top flight production company to pair them with. So whether it be Bune and Murray, Large Eyes, 51 Minds, and kind of align all those things and then try to sell projects. Also, I'm kind of helping the team that's already there. Tim and Eli and all those guys are trying to help, because I mean, obviously with my past being the CEO of All Def previously and all that stuff, trying to reimagine what creative content means from a digital landscape for record labels, because I'm a firm believer that there's a real opportunity to build out a digital presence for artists and not just have YouTube pages be nothing but music videos, and really try to create those super fans, just so that audience is always growing. So when you do drop a music video, that audience is already looking for content, instead of just coming up with these dope formats and going to other platforms and giving away your audience to them for free. You can keep all that in one space. So yeah, it's been fun. I've been there for 6 months. I mean, we've obviously worked together for my All Def days, but it's been fun.
I think that's super important to point out in terms of just like YouTube, right? I think there's a misconception to treat it as just a music video platform.
Yeah.
We have to really treat it as a social platform, just because your subscribers, you might have like 100,000 subscribers, but if you only post, every 3 weeks, those subscribers are not going to be engaged.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, I understand for like artists on all different, like if you're not with a label, obviously the cost of doing video content is expensive. But I mean, obviously there's some low hanging, and we talked about on our digital panel we did, but like there are some low hanging fruit things you can do, whether it be vlogs like Guap Dad does and all that stuff, just to do something, just so people have like, oh, okay, I see who they are in these music videos, but like to get a deeper sense of who these artists are as people. So.
Yeah, 100%. I think for the emerging artists that are listening, you can repurpose a lot of the content that you're posting on your other socials, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, and repurpose it and post it, those vlogs that you want to post as additional content to your music videos on your YouTube channel. I always recommend that. And just because where we are right now and dealing with COVID and just content, video consumption is at all-time high,
Yeah.
right? So, people are looking to watch content, consume content. They're looking for new content. So this is a time to really build your YouTube platforms.
Yeah, and also, especially with my past coming from digital, I'm doing that in the premium space. They kind of go hand in hand because while I was at All Def, I did like an arable pilot model where we would invest in series that would only be on digital with the hopes that we'd go to a network and kind of like, okay, this is what a smaller version is. This is with the networks going, we could build out to be a premium series, and every artist could do that themselves. Where put something in your channel, start small, invest in it, own it your own, and then when you go out, you have more leverage with the buyers. You're like, no, this isn't a crapshoot. This is what the show is. This is what the data is. This is the watch time, all that shit. So yeah.
That's a great point, given that you can really build like the pilot version, to your point, on YouTube, and you have real metrics to show there is an audience, just to sell to TV, which is obviously different, but still you still have a kind of like a starting point, like something.
Yeah, because even like great like shows like Insecure and Workaholics. Workaholics was a YouTube show, and they just believed in it and they funded it, and like so. I think the same thing, which has traditionally been done for like Hollywood creators, can be done for musicians if you just have the right people and the right like plans, the strategies, and yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. But obviously, I think our core, community and my peers know you as Chris Blackwell, but who's Chris Blackwell like, 20 years ago? Who's
I mean, I can give a little breakdown.
Yeah, give some background in terms of where you grew up, your early influences in music. Did you grow up in a house of music? Who are like the first early artists that you leaned towards? Like, what was that first project like?
Yeah.
So curious.
So if I talk too fast or too long, just jump in any time. So
Okay.
I mean, growing up, like I mean, I'm biracial. I'm a African American, as I like to say. My dad's Jamaican, my mom's Irish. So
Love it.
I mean, growing up, I always had like I had influences from both sides. So in the very very early days, I mean, I think the thing that is great with kids when you're young, and especially in the era that we grew up, where I mean, we were right at the point where LimeWire, Napster, all that shit was out there. So we didn't have to go. I mean, there was physical CDs were there, but like our age of discovery was we had so many more options because literally everything was right there.
Yeah.
So for me, like I started with Jimi Hendrix, like Pink Floyd, Biggie, Big L, Tupac, all that shit, and tried to have a wide range of music in my life, just because.
Great.
I mean, I think that obviously even like punk rock shit, like the Sex Pistols and shit like that.
Wow.
Like, I think that it had a big influence in my life because if you look back, like all these things that happens are in cycles. Like if you look at what happened with punk rock and rock, punk rock was a rebellion of rock. And then like in the punk rock space, no one from the old rock space supported the punk rock space. I feel like that's kind of similar to what happens nowadays with like the old heads and the SoundCloud rappers.
Yeah.
SoundCloud was rebellion of that. No one supported it. And then the generations, they have no role models and you see what happens. So like, I mean, that doesn't do it, but that's just an insight that I had back then. So yeah, so I mean, I listened to everything. Growing up, I mean, I lived all over. I mean, before the 9th grade, I lived in about 20 different states. So I lived in
That's crazy.
Green
So
Bay,
you
Wisconsin.
traveled a lot.
Yeah, I lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I lived in Savannah, Georgia. I lived in New Orleans for a little bit. I lived in Jacksonville, Florida, Maryland, Chicago, all these different places. And so, like, growing up, for me, I didn't like. I never had that group of friends where it's like, oh, I've known that guy since I was in 2nd grade. Like, I just don't. All my longest friends in my life have been people I met here in Los Angeles. So I grew up. I mean, and really had music just to imagine and dream, and like I just knew that whenever like I was an adult, I wanted to live in like a big city, and just I was always entertained by the arts, whether it be entertainment. Growing up, I was a huge Basquiat fan, like The Radiant Child, all those docs, and just because I was always, I mean, I was in these bigger cities, but I wasn't in the culture like I wanted to. But I always was inspired by these cultural moments where something can start with such a small group of people and then expand and inspire like a whole generation. Like, so yeah. So after that, I mean, I grew up, I mean, where my parents said, like, look, where you start high school, that's where you can finish. So it was in this small town on the Eastern Shore of Maryland called Salisbury, Maryland, where it was, I think
All right.
No, not like 3 hours past. I mean, it was like a rural fucking area. So like,
Okay. No,
yeah, huh?
noted. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I was so close to Baltimore and all that shit. And like, that was
Yeah.
always like cool. It was a hop, skip, and jump. But like, it allowed me to be like, when I went to high school, was like, I want to, when I graduate and start my life, I want to get as far away from this shit as possible, because it was very like narrow-minded. It was
Right.
kind of like a Friday Night Lights town. Like
Gotcha. Just football.
people cared about that. People cared about their flatbed trucks and all that shit. And I just knew it wasn't me, because like the things that like I was interested in like listening to, people were like, "That's so weird." Like because
Yeah.
I was listening to experiment, like everything from Daft Punk back in the day to, I mean, to Coldplay, to like and all this shit. Like as a black man, like people expect you just to be in one lane.
Right.
And so yeah, that was an era. So after that, I went to school. Didn't graduate school. Really went there and partied too much. Joined a
Okay.
fraternity. Got
Where'd you
kicked
go to
out.
school?
Huh? I went to
Where'd you go?
a school called Frostburg State University, and I went to
Okay.
University of Maryland for a couple semesters. Got
Was
kicked
that in
out.
Maryland?
Yeah, Maryland. Yeah. And so when I got kicked out, I was like, look, like I know I want to make it in entertainment. I know I
Right.
want to do something different. I'm either going to New York or I'm going to LA. But I knew if I went to New York and if shit got bad, I could just pack up my stuff and come back home.
Right.
So I had like $2,000 in my savings account. I worked at this. I remember I worked at this fish market in the Inner Harbor of Baltimore. Just for one summer, I was doing like double shifts, literally butterflying and cleaning fish all summer, just to
Wow.
save to move to LA. Because I'm like, look, like this job is gonna teach me what I don't want to. What will happen in my life if I stay around here? I'm just gonna
Right.
keep on fucking up. I'm gonna keep on doing nothing with my life. So I'm gonna
It humbled
work
you.
in the fish market, smell like fish every day, just so I know, work hard so you never get back to this place. So I did that for a summer. I saved $2,000, packed up everything I had, which at that point was a fucking duffel bag. Got on a plane, came to LA, didn't know anybody, landed at LAX, and I got in the cab. I was like, yo, so I just kind of came out on a whim. And that was back when like LAX had cabs. It was before Uber and all that shit. So I was like, I need cheap rent. And he's like, how cheap do you want? I'm like, bro, like I'm 21. I just came out here. I don't know. So he's like, cool. It took me to Skid Row.
Hold up. Let's retract real
Yeah,
quick.
because I told you, like, once you fast, just stop me.
A lot of things happening here.
Yeah.
So you travel, you travel across the U.S., right? Meeting different, real young, different influences. Obviously your music taste is super eclectic.
Yeah.
Travel. Eventually, you end up as Salisbury, Maryland, where you finish up high school.
Yep.
Right. Post up there. College doesn't work out.
Nope.
So, and in your mind, you want to see the big picture, like the big city experience, right?
Well, I just wanted something. I just wanted to step outside. I just wanted something that would challenge me, and I knew that I had big aspirations. And like, if I kept on hanging with the crowd that I was with, I was just gonna be one of those guys that like, oh, whatever happened to that kid? Like, he was smart, and then like those years are between 18 and like 22 are so. You can be influenced in so many different ways of like going down a wrong path or get caught in the crowd, and like it's just like
Was there like a moment where you're like, okay, I gotta stop, for lack of a better word, just stop fucking up, and I just gotta just lock in and focus?
Well, I mean, if we're gonna be all the way real, I started dabbling with some narcotics.
Okay.
Yeah, and so like around there, it's like when those prescription pills were like rampant in the Northeast, and so I started taking like OxyContin a little bit, and like I started doing that and doing that, and I just knew, I'm like, bro, what are you doing? And it wasn't like injecting or it was just like it was an era where like people were just popping those like they were popping fucking Molly back then, especially in the Northeast. And so I just in the moment where I'm like, I had so much going for me out of high school. I mean, I graduated early. I graduated when I was 17. Like,
wow.
I went to school. I fucked up. I had the full ride scholarship, but when I got there, I just partied and like didn't do anything. So I'm like, I was the first kid in my family to go to college. So I'm like, bro, like, what are you doing? And so when I saw myself slip, I'm like, that's why like I forced myself to like get that job. That look, if you keep on down this path, this is what you're gonna be doing for the rest of your fucking life. And that's why I just wanted to move out there, because I knew if I kept on hanging out with that crowd with my friends, like, because they were perfectly content with doing with that. And I look back and some of those guys are still doing that, but I just knew that I wanted something better for myself.
Yeah, I think that's so super important to know, because I think, we've all kind of been there, in high school, early on. And I think just because in terms of just like influence, your peers definitely condition you to do things, because it's hard to see in the future, right? Like
Yeah.
what your expertise are, like what your interests are. Like at that time, you're thinking about the moment that you're in
Yeah,
and
when you're
enjoying.
young, and when you're young, you're just like exactly what you said. You're A, this is the first time in your life where you have any sort of freedom. B, you're still determining who you are as a human being. And there's just so many options, and a lot of those options are bad options. And like without
Right.
that strong, because I had parents, but it wasn't like a traditional strong family structure where things like taxes and 401ks and savings, and like I was the first one to do it. So it's like,
Right.
okay, I don't know about going to like I didn't have anyone laying down that road of like, this is what you should do, this is what you
Mhm.
shouldn't do. And now that I look back, like I'm so fucking happy it happened that way, because if you don't get your hand burnt by the fire, you're never gonna know how hot that flame is. And that's what happens with most people when they have like a traditional background, everything's handed to them and everything's provided for them. Once they
Right.
get their first taste of real life, they fucking spiral because they've never had the struggle before.
Right. It's a good point. I think early on, the good thing is that you had the wherewithal to make that decision, and
Yeah.
you're like, get the fuck out of here,
Yeah.
and move to LA. And I give you a lot of credit too. Without, I've been there before, where I literally had quit a high-paying job without no clear plan. So for you to go out to LA, 21,
No
with
paying job.
no
no,
paying job,
no paying job. I was stealing fishes.
two G's,
Yeah.
uh, just your bag is man, that must have been crazy.
I mean, looking back, when you're young, like I look back now, I'm just like, bro, like what the fuck was I thinking? Because I mean, when I got to LA, and I'll tell that later when we go on, but like
Yeah.
just doing that, it was the biggest leap of faith. But like, I'm so happy I did it, because I mean, because if I did go to New York and like I said, and shit got bad, I would go right back home. And I would probably be still sleeping on my mom's couch and being a loser. Like,
Yeah, no, for sure. So in terms of timeline, so you move, so you figure out, how do you get acclimated into LA? Like,
yeah.
what's that first couple months like,
So
trying to find your footing?
yeah, so when I got in the cab, he was like, "Oh, what cheap?" I told him what cheap brand. He took me to Skid Row, and so real
Yo,
life, real life. And
crazy.
so I was like, "Wait," I was like, "Bro, this isn't. Is this LA?" Because I was like, "Where the fuck are the palm trees?" Like
Where's the water?
in my mind, I'd never been to LA before, so I'm like, I was
Yeah,
thinking Entourage. I was thinking like, and I was
yeah.
like, okay, and so I got like a crackhead hotel, and I stayed there
Oh,
for like a
no.
week. And then, I ended up moving from Skid Row to this area called MacArthur Park. Have you heard of MacArthur Park? It's like right outside downtown, which is
No.
a less shady area. It's not like Skid Row with like homeless people, but MacArthur Park is like the birthplace of MS-13. It's like, it's pretty crazy, but it was at least safer then. I wasn't in like a crackhead motel, and like
Right.
I was working at this restaurant Yard House in LA Live. It was right when LA Live was built. That's when I
Yard
moved.
House. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
Yard
so
House.
I was actually I opened that restaurant, and so I worked there. I knew that I wanted to break into music, art, entertainment, just the whole culture of LA, but didn't know how to do it. And so what I did was I started this blog called We With It LA.
We with it, LA. Okay,
Yeah, it's like with it without. I thought it was cooler to drop the H and just say We With It LA. And
that's
so
dope.
what I would do is I would find like very early artists like Packed In and like all this shit, and like and write on them. And then I would do artists, I would do fashion brands, and then I would do like artists, like as in like actual like painters and shit like that. And
Gotcha.
so that, I started with that. I wrote it by myself. It gained a little bit of buzz. At the height, I was getting like 80,000 page views a month, which for me,
Ooh,
like, yeah, it's
that's
pretty tight.
impressive.
Yeah.
Impressive.
And
So
so
around what year was this? So just so like for
this
context,
was
the
okay.
digital time.
So 21. I guess 2010.
Gotcha. Like at the height of the blog era.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it was nothing on the level of our boy JD and like Modi and all those
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but for me, me being young and just being in LA and like people inviting me to parties to like wrote for this blog, I thought I was the coolest motherfucker in the world. But
For
for me,
sure.
like I knew that I wanted to have this blog just so I could write about these people super early. So if they blew up or whatever happened, I knew that this little free blog would help me get to my next thing. And so I ended up writing for this brand called Zane Robe. I don't know if you ever heard of it. They did like the Sure Shot pants. There's this Australian-based streetwear company. I wrote about them, and they ended up coming to America, and they're like, "Look, you were like one of the first people to write about us, so we want you to be our head of PR and marketing." And so
What?
it was like a small company, but still, I was like, "Bro, like, yes, cool." So now I can like say I have a real fucking job. Like I'm like my whole story is fake it till you make it. That's the history of Chris Blackwell. So
Yeah.
I did that for about a year and a half, and like it was crazy because right when I got there, the brand blew up, and they did $15 million in sales the first year I was there. So
Wow.
yeah, and so I was going to like Agenda Trade Show. I was going to like Liberty Fairs in New York and all that shit, and like it was just crazy because like I mean we did a collaboration with Kendrick. That's where I met like Dave Free. That's where I met Isaiah. Like Isaiah, I was in the room with Isaiah Rashad the day he signed to TDE. Like he was like, bro, I don't know if I should do it. Like my guy Dan Maynard, like it was just crazy because he was so young and so that's like through that little blog. That's where I met all these guys and like so I did that for like a year and a half and like it was cool, but like I was partying too much. I was like it was just I knew that it was a rut. It was just like if I stayed in Baltimore, if I got used to that lifestyle, that I wouldn't go.
Right.
It was the same thing. I was like, bro, you're getting lost in the sauce in a little bit, and like this isn't something that's going to be. It doesn't have long tail. So
Right. There was a ceiling there. So let's pause for
yeah,
a second. So, I mean, now you're at this phase where LA, right? Move there, figuring things out,
yep.
working at the restaurant, have this opportunity. You start this blog, then you start working for this
Streetwear
this company,
Yeah,
and then getting your footing, and you're like, oh, like I'm the shit. Like
yeah.
moving around.
And that's a cautionary tale for everyone. Whatever your ego thinks you are, you're never that. And like, you might be a big fish in a small pond, but there's
Right.
always a fucking ocean 5 miles away, and you're gonna be nothing.
Yeah, it's a humbling experience. And what was it for you where you're just like, all right, because like this is the second time you have this kind of epiphany where like, okay, I don't want to fall down this path.
Yeah.
I need to pivot.
I mean, I just
Um,
started looking around at the people who were around me, and like, I looked at the people who were older than me and said, if I was at that age and that was me, would I be happy with where I was at in life? And I said, no. So I'm like, if those people around you are the people who are like, man, I've been doing this for 15 years, I'm like, bro, go start a family or something, dog. Like, what are you doing? You're 45 and like talking about where the bitch is at. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, no. I was like, he's like, if you're lucky, you can be where I'm at in 15 years. I'm like, if I'm where you're at in 15 years, then a lot of things went wrong. Like, and so I just knew that like, I don't know, I just knew that I wanted more in life. And like, my whole thing is just like going early to something. Wherever environment I go to, I'm always a sponge. I absorb as much free game and knowledge as I can and use it for the next thing. And just move
so
like, and just knowing like, never get too comfortable where you're at. Like, cause if things,
great lesson.
what's that?
That's a great lesson.
Yeah, just never like if you're in something, it's like a party. Never be the last person to leave a party. Like if a party's jumping, like leave it like right when it hits its climax. Because if you're the straggler and you're the last one there, it's not gonna be a good vibe.
Yeah, you want to kind of leave at its high, its peak, and then pivot.
And like if you're not, the minute you stop learning something, you should go. Or the minute you feel comfortable, that's when you become obsolete. And so yeah.
No, I think that's important to know, especially for just a lot of young people that maybe experiencing early wins early in their careers, and saying like, hey, like I've kind of like peaked at where I want to go. To say like, you can't challenge yourself even more. You shouldn't be satisfied with just being comfortable with what you're given, because that you could be at a high that day and low tomorrow. So kind of thinking about like,
and that's
everything is
the thing too. Is like throughout the whole process, and that's the thing that throughout my whole life, like I've always been kind of like the peaks and valleys of life, and like things have always been really good and then really bad. So when I was younger and like, man, I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I fucking love it here. I have friends. I have all that shit. Oh, 2 days later, my mom tells me we're moving. So like, I've always lived that mindset of like never being too comfortable and always like preparing for the next setback. And like for me, like even when I was in my mid-20s, like if things were going too well, I would get anxiety because I'm like, wait, like something is about to happen, and like and just always being prepared for that. And that's why it's made me enjoy every moment for the not enjoy, but take advantage of every moment that you have, absorb everything, because a lot of people get too complacent, too comfortable, and they think that moments are going to last forever. No, every fucking empire has its end. The Roman Empire, people thought would never end. Like everything comes to an end, and you can't think it's going to live forever. And the only loss of when something comes to an end is if you don't learn anything from it.
Right. No, I think those are so many gems. Nothing lasts forever. If you can't take anything away from it, then you never. It was never really a good experience for you at all. So as you're experiencing this, what's your next pivot for you?
So after the fashion boutique, I was like, cool. It was at a time when digital media was fucking popping up, and like so there's this company called Fullscreen, and like I was like, all right, I want to get into this world. It was like the MCN world, all that shit. The big MCNs were, I mean, at the time there was no big ones because it was super early, but some of the bigger ones when it was all over were like Maker Studios, Fullscreen, Awesomeness TV, Big Frame, Collective, all those people. And so
and this is on YouTube? Is this on YouTube, just for context?
Yeah, YouTube MCN, yeah. So this was about 2012 now, 2012 or 2013, something like that. So I went on LinkedIn. At that time, I didn't even have a LinkedIn profile. And so I saw that there was a social media strategist position. And so I saw it, but I was like, fuck, I don't have a LinkedIn. I don't have any job experience. So what I did was I found 4 resumes of people who were social media strategists, and I copy and pasted to my one resume. And I just and all the jobs were made up. I just made it my LinkedIn profile. And then so I was like, cool. Like, I was like, okay, well, if I just have a LinkedIn profile with no connections, people are just not gonna think it's real. And so I just started adding people. Until I got to the point where it says 500 plus connections. Yeah. And then like, so when I would like apply for these jobs, it would say like, oh, this person has these friends that you know and have in common. And luckily I never got called out on it. So like I applied to the job. The CEO, his name is George Champolis. At that time, the company was about 30 people. And I sit down and literally the night before, I'm like looking up buzzwords, CPV, call to action, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know this shit. Like I got kicked out of college. I had a blog. I was in fashion. And so I go there and I sit down and he's like, it's an hour interview. And he's like, okay, I mean, you seem like you know what you're talking about, but like, I don't really believe you quite yet. Why don't you come back tomorrow? Oh, come back next week. We'll have a round 2 of the interview. And so I was like, okay. And then so I went home, crammed more. And he called me back. He's like, all right, I mean, you got me again, but let's just do one final interview. And at this point, I'm like, I'm broke. I'm like, because I quit the fashion job just because it was getting too much partying. And so like, I was literally eating one 7-Eleven pizza every 2 days. Like I would get a 7-Eleven pizza and cut it in 4s, and that was all the food I had because I was dead broke.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like the brokest I've ever been in my life. I was on unemployment, and like I was buying like you don't know the lows of low until you're buying a 7-Eleven pizza with the EBT card that's gonna last you for 2 days.
Oh my god.
Yeah, well, I was just like, but like for me, just because I've been through that so many times in life, that shit excites me. When I'm losing and like shit's going wrong, I'm like, because I always know that it all goes back to what the circle of life. It's like the back of a camel's back. There's ups and downs. Right. When you're down, it seems like you're never gonna get up, and when you're up, it seems like the sky's never gonna fall. And so I come back for the 3rd time and do the same pitch, and he's like, "Well, Chris, if you're a con man, you're the best con man I've ever seen. I'm gonna give you the job, but I'm gonna give you a 90-day employment contract." And so I was like, homie, cool. I was like, at this point, like, I need a job. Like, and so I didn't tell him that, obviously. So I start there. And it was like a really cool experience because like it was my first, it was a startup. It was like my first real company. Like I was like, shit, they have like, wait, all these snacks are for free? Like I can have as much as I want? And they're like, yeah. It was like a typical tech startup. I was like, okay. And they're like, wait, I'm like, there's catered lunch? Like, what? And so, but then it was cool. And so when I started, there's 30 employees, and within
Mhm.
8 months, the company had a fucking inflection point, and we had 300 people. So it went from 30
Wow.
to 300 in 8 months. But it was very valuable because the
Huh.
CEO was always fucking close to me. He's like, Chris, like, I like you. You're young. You're hungry. You're the first person in. And I used to make a point. I was like, look, I don't care, because I didn't have a car or anything. I was like, I don't care how many buses I have to take. I'm gonna make a point to myself to be the first one in and the last one out every fucking day. And I did that for 6 months. I would get there at 6 o'clock in the morning and leave at like 10. And even if I was just like on YouTube googling shit, I just wanted to see that I was there, just so like this kid works. Like I don't know what he's doing, but I see him. And so
Visibility.
yeah, it's just like, and so like it got to a point where it was like at like one of our all hands, he was like, look, like we need hard workers. I mean, Chris Blackwell, I think he's a janitor, he's here so much, and blah blah blah. I'm like, so at that point, and I was actually killing in my job too, because I mean they all me not being traditionally trained and like all the way that
Right.
they think, everything that I said, they're like, wow, I don't know why I didn't ever think about that. It's because they went to school. Everyone goes to college and gets the same bullshit courses, and it trains your mind to think in such a formatted way that you can't
Right.
think outside the box. And so for
Right.
me, like everything I said, they're like, oh, okay, let's bring Chris into this. Like, and so I was at meetings that like I had no reason being it, but like I was the cool, and not to mention I was like four black people in the whole company. So I was the cool, creative black guy. And so they would pull me into these meetings. And so, but it was very valuable because I mean, it was the early time of digital media. So I got to learn about like SEO optimization,
Mm.
like brand partnerships, all this shit. And like, because the CEO fucked with me. He's like, look, like anything you want to learn, just go and do it. Like, and I mean, and that's the one thing throughout my whole career. I've been
Right.
extremely fortunate to have great mentors, like, and great people who
Okay.
have believed in me. But like they believed in me because I went the extra mile and I put in the work. And like what I always
Right.
tell people is like promotions and raises and all that shit, that is not earned between 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is like the minimum to get a paycheck.
Right.
You have to those before 9 and after 5. That's where you earn your stripes.
Big lessons learned. I mean, um, there's a lot of things happening there. So let
Yeah,
me
yeah,
deconstruct it a bit. So you're learning. Obviously, you're building your resume as a social media strategist. You're
yep,
learning all the buzzwords and terms.
yep,
You dive into it, having this like non-traditional approach to like social media marketing. Given that digital marketing as a whole is still brand new,
yeah,
right? Still brand new. And you're learning as you go. You know, to your point, I think this is important for like a lot of our younger audience. You made an effort to be the first one in, the last one out. And also maybe understanding where you were before and where you didn't want to be. Right.
exactly.
I think that idea and motion motivates people just because, this is an opportunity you want to like, have and maintain.
Yep.
Um, I think it's super important. What was that process like? Because you had, you obviously convinced this guy to hire you, and then you jump into like these projects. Like,
Well,
how are you navigating as you're
every
learning?
day I was like, fuck, these people are gonna find out that I'm a fraud. Like every day. Like, and it's even to this day, it's one of those things where like, even though I'm past and like I prove I know I'm where I'm at because I'm smart and I'm good at my job, but like I still think every day I'm like, fuck, they're gonna find out I'm a fraud. But like during that time it motivated me. That's why I worked so hard, because like you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You if you're the hardest working person in the room. So like I found great mentors in the building, and like I mean I just learned a lot. Like going back to what I said earlier, being a sponge no matter what environment. Like it was essentially a paid internship for me. But I delivered my job, and like
Right.
some people that think, especially, I mean, I guess I'm a millennial. I don't know. I'm 32. I don't know what the age is, but like a lot of people think that shit should be handed to you, and like people should like, oh, I'm gonna mentor you, blah blah blah. Like it's a two-way
Mhm.
street. You have to put something in for people to see
Right.
the value in you, and like, and then you get everything. But like, yeah. So I mean, the projects were, I mean, we were doing. It was like it was early, and we were doing our like SVOD stuff. So I learned about digital marketing and
Mm.
Facebook targeting pixels and how to convert your audience and all this shit. And then there's this Channel Plus team that did people like big companies like Ford and all this would pay these people to manage their YouTube presence. And so they were like, cool, like you can come to this Ford pitch with us and like hear how we sell this business. I was like, okay. And then I was like a kid in like a candy factory. And so they're like, oh, since you were in there for that pitch, here, come. This is how we start a campaign. This is how we choose our keywords, our metadata, all that shit. And so like, it was everything I would do for the rest of my career. I learned there. I got paid to do it.
Wow, crazy. And you talked about mentors early on. I mean, I want to stress that also for the audience too, like how, you know, you don't necessarily have to, you know, it's try to find one, but sometimes I think naturally you'll kind of lean into one, right? You know, in terms of just like being a sponge and asking questions. And the more people that are, I think as you figure out who's the most responsive and the most willingness to like teach you and walk you through things, you can find those early champions as you're trying to build your career. You know, I think in your case, right, you found that in your first job, so first real job.
Yeah.
You know? So as you're, you know, being the creative guy, the creative Black guy in the agency, what's your kind of pivot into music? Where you start kind of like go back into the music space, just because like that's where your initial passions and interests were.
So after I was there for about 1.5 years or 2 years, I'll never forget on Christmas Eve. It was funny because my girlfriend at the time, I was living with her, and like we were breaking up, and she went back to Korea to her family. She's like, look, when you get back, like you probably should be moved out. And so I didn't really have money and blah blah blah. So Christmas Eve, Russell Simmons calls me.
Wait, what?
And yeah.
Wait, hold on.
I know. You said how I got to music. This is how I get to music.
How did he get your number?
Hey, let me tell the whole story. And excuse my language here for the listeners, but Christmas Eve I get a call, and he says, nigga, what's it gonna take for you to come work for me? I said, who's this? He's like, it's Russell Simmons. I hang up on him because I thought it was one of my friends fucking with me because they knew I was in this position and I had to like get to my next gig. And he calls me back and he's like, nigga, this is Russell Simmons. I'm calling your bitch ass on Christmas Eve. What's it gonna take for you to come work for me? And so I was like, wait, Russell's like, I've never been in music at all. And so I'm like, the Russell Simmons? He's like, yes. And I was like, A, how'd you get my number? B, what's the job? C, like, it's Christmas Eve. Why are you calling me? Like, and so he's like, well, when I was in LA, I took a yoga class with this guy, Larry Shapiro, who was our head of talent at Fullscreen. And I was telling him about this company, All Def, that I'm starting. And like, Larry said that you're the hardest working person there. And I mean, and he said that you weren't a right cultural fit and you're way too cultured for that place and that I should reach out to you. And so I was like, oh, fuck. I was like, okay, what's All Def? He's like, well, we're trying to create like the urban vice and blah, blah, blah. And I want you to come in. We only have like 10 people. And at that time, All Def was a subsidiary of Awesomeness TV. And so he's like, I want you to come in. I want you to be our head of social, blah, blah, blah. What's it gonna take for you to come work for me? I was like, well, to be honest, like, I'm kind of in the jam. I have to find a new apartment. I have to do all this shit. So I want this salary, and I want a signing bonus of this, and I need a signing bonus in a week. And he's like,
you put all these terms out during the call?
Yeah. He's like, I'm calling your bitch ass on Christmas Eve. What's it gonna take for you to come work for me? I'm like, all right, fam, I'm gonna tell you. I'll sign today if these are the terms. And so. And also at that time, Fullscreen had got acquired by AT&T. And so it was like my time there was served, and like I was like over it because like they were a agency for like tween Midwest girls, and like I would like send tweets like pizza and Wi-Fi is bae, and like I would go to like VidCon and shit like that. People were like, wait, you're the social? I thought it was like some like white woman from Kansas. And I was like, no, it's this guy with hand tattoos. And like they're like, wow. Like, so it just was the worst fit for me. But like, so I was eager to jump. And so when I told Russell that's what I want, he was like, done. And he wired me the money the next day for my signing bonus. And so that's how, and that's how I started at All Def. And that's how I got into music. So like I said, my whole career is just, I've been fucking so lucky. I've just always, but when I get good opportunities, I get the most of them. And like, I'm even to this day, now that I'm at Republic, I still go into Republic the same mindset that I have when with the full screen, and the learning process never stops.
100%. To your point, that's wild. I don't know if you know this story too. So JD, so I started Digilogue in 2016, and then he DM'd me, and that's how we connected. So 6 months later, he hired me because of what I was doing with the Digilogue. So sometimes you just never know.
Yeah,
Just
I
based off of
remember
what
I
you're
first
doing.
met you, and because I think it was at All Def, and we are coming to pitch everything we're doing, and you had just started
Yeah,
in
I
that big room with Scott
just started.
Greer. Yeah,
Yeah, I officially just started. I was consulting at the
yeah,
time, but I officially joined the team. And yeah, just I think to your point, you kind of laid the groundwork, and it's it's one of those things where you let your work speak for yourself, and you were able to do that at full screen. And you also had like those early champions and Larry Shapiro. Luckily enough, he was in the yoga
yeah,
class.
yeah. And that's so LA of a thing to happen,
Yeah,
and like, so then do we start going to All Def now?
yeah, that's
Yeah,
all deaf. So you get this wire, changes your life.
yeah. I mean, it was only like $5,000, which that's not a small amount of money, but like it
Yeah,
wasn't a life changing amount, but it did change my life at that moment.
yeah.
Like,
No,
so I came to All Def. I was probably the 10th employee then. Started as a head of social. At that time, All Def Digital was very fragmented, I guess you could say, because that's when Russell was still there. The CEO was this guy Sanjay Sharma. They were a comedy. What they were trying to do was they had a label with Steve Rifkin called
mhm.
All Def, and
There's a lot just going on there.
yeah, and so I went there, and I just knew that the brand, because Russell and Rifkin, and Russell, I still talk to Russell once a week, so nothing against those guys, but they were trying to bring their 90s way of music into a digital time. Like the industry has changed so much. It's not that it wasn't like that, and so it was just a weird time. And also at that time, they were like a comedy page where we were trying to sign comedians and breaking the big screen stars and all this shit. So started there as the head of social, then became the head of marketing,
Yeah.
then became the head of music, then became the chief digital officer. And so everything, and then eventually became CEO. But like everything was a great learning lesson. I mean, obviously, when Russell went away, that was kind of like my defining moment in music was the way
Right.
that like people were like, oh fuck, this guy knows his shit. Is in like 2000, I think it was 2015. I threw this party at South by Southwest with Ham on Everything.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so it was like that was back when we were just a comedy brand. I was like, look, we should be doing more music. Like Universal Music Group owned 25% of us, and they're like, cool, well, go throw a party in South by, and if you can get people to show up and like you create buzz, then we'll do it. And so I was like, cool. I was like, what's budget are you guys gonna give me? They're like, we'll give you $25,000. I'm like, what? I was like, it's South by. There's like Samsung parties are like $1 million. And so I was like, fuck it, like, give me an inch and I'll take a mile. So I was like, cool, I'll do that. And so I linked up with Ham on Everything. Somehow, Empire Control Room. That's
Yeah.
where a few years we threw our party. But anyway, so Mazda had backed out, and the guys were like, look, as long as you cover the bar guarantee, you can have the venue for free. And so I was like, bet. And so then I talked to the Ham on Everything guys. I was like, look, I have no budget. I have no money. I for all in for talent, I can probably give you guys 10K. Can you just make me a fire lineup? I trust you guys. Let's do this. And so in 2006, 15 or 16, we got Playboy Cardi, 21 Savage, Lil
What?
Uzi, Made in Tokyo, and Waka Flocka. Waka Flocka was the one, like, we got Waka Flocka, because at that time, all those other guys, I was like, they were merging. I'm like, okay. But like, now I look back, I'm like, holy fuck. Like, all those guys played for free. 21 Savage, Lil Uzi, they all played for free. Yeah. Oh, and I have Lil Yachty playing too.
What?
Yeah.
Crazy.
So that's when I went from the head of marketing to the head of music. And so then as head of music, I was like just trying to make more original programming and kind of separate the pages, because comedy and music were always under one thing. I wanted to separate the music brand, because obviously a comedy audience and the music audience are two totally different things. If you have a music page, if you have a comedy page and you try to put emerging artists on there, that comedy page is used to just roasting people, and there's nothing more fragile than a new artist. And so like we decided to separate the pages, two own verticals, create more original content that was music focused. And then that's when the Russell Simmons thing happened. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so Russell was, the day he introduced me as chief digital officer, he was like, there might be some story in the LA Times. No big, it's not anything true. But that was the last time we saw Russell. And so the board was like, look, Chris, we'll give you a year to save the company, or we're going to close it down.
Wow.
And so within that year, I'm like, and for me, I'm like, I never dealt with like shit on the outside like that. And so I was like flying to New York every month, just trying to close business. And then I went to UMG, and we closed this $5 million original content deal that kind of saved the company.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know it's a lot to unpack, but yeah.
So walk me through that. I mean, so now you're pivoting, right? You're getting promoted to these different roles.
Yep.
Initially, you started as the head of socials.
Yep.
Then you kind of get promoted to the head of marketing.
Yep.
Now the head of music. You know, things change from a leadership standpoint.
Yep.
But now you're thrown in to run a company.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind at the time? You know, now you're in a situation where you've been here before, not in a sense where like this position, but where now like you kind of have all this responsibility. You have to figure things out. Like what's going through your mind during this time?
I mean, at the time I was like, fuck, this is a great opportunity. But like looking back, I probably should have. And like for me, I was just like, when you're young, it's like when I moved to LA, I was young and anything's possible. When I took it over, I just thought this is a great opportunity to save this company and do something. And like at that point, I've worked there for 4 years, and everyone at the company were my friends. It's not like they're my family. And like I said earlier, I didn't really have any long-term friends growing up. So people I work with there, I'm like, you guys are my family at this point. And so if anything, I wanted to save the company for them, not for me. I mean, it's important to me too. And so, I mean, looking back, I probably should have asked more questions about like the finances of the company and all that shit, because as soon as I took over, I realized that like the company was about to go bankrupt. And so I had to run around, and like, I went from being a head of fucking music I had to do like corporate finance, where I'm like talking to VCs. I had to go raise money. I had to go do all this shit. And like, I'd never done that. I didn't even fucking graduate from college. And so like, to be in a board meeting with like asking for a $6 million raise and all this shit, like I just had to learn like corporate financing on the fly. And it was looking back, it was extremely chaotic. I mean, I had no work-life balance. I had no nothing. And like, I was just in the trenches, and like, it was, looking back, I wouldn't do it. I might do it again, but like, yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, it was like you basically you kind of turned to switch survival mode, and whatever it would take to get out of the trenches.
But then it was weird too, because it went from like overnight, like at the company, one day everyone's my coworkers. So then one day I'm the CEO. I'm like, and like everyone's like, wait, like why are we listening to Chris? Like it was a weird transition, because most times like CEOs are old white men most times, and like people aren't used to having young, and it was a crazy times. And then like, so not only did all the Russell shit happen, but then like I had to go on the road and try to raise money. And so I remember, South by, when we threw the party with Def Jam, I never even told you this. So right before our party, I had a meeting with a big hedge fund, because I've been raising money, and we were supposed to sign the paperwork. So they were going to put in $8 million in the company. Wow. And they invite me to this fancy hotel and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, Chris, have a seat. And I sit down, I'm like, well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. As a young black man of the culture, this means so much. Everyone at the company, it's gonna change people's lives. And he's like, Chris, before you get too far, I have to tell you something. Unfortunately, we're going to pull the deal. I was like, what? Because UMG was going to put in money. This private hedge fund was going to put in money. UMG already signed off on the deal. And I was like, what do you mean you're going to pull the deal? They're like, well, I don't know if you heard about the college cheating scandal, but the head of our hedge fund was the main one implementing that. So all of our media investments are frozen. And so I was like, but what does that mean? So I literally had to go from hearing that deal got pulled to our party, and I go to the party, and the party was dead. That was like the worst day of my life. But and the thing is, I couldn't so immediately after that happened, I'm like, shit, I want to tell everybody at the company what's going on, and they're like, well, unfortunately, I called the board right after they said they're pulling the deal, and they're like, well, unfortunately, because you're the CEO, if you tell anyone at the company, we're going to sue you because you have a fiduciary obligation as the CEO of the company not to disclose financial information to the staff. And so I had to go to the party, and everyone's like, Chris, congratulations, you closed the deal. Good job, good, because everyone knew that. That's where I was at. And so I was like, why aren't you happy? I'm like, oh, I just want to wait till I get back to LA to celebrate. Because I couldn't tell them, because if I did, they were going to sue me.
That's crazy. And
it's crazy.
It's unfortunate that you were put in that position too, just because, it wasn't like you necessarily asked for it. Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes you're put in these peculiar positions, and you have to figure things out, and then also too you're also responsible for the livelihood of other people, and it's hard. You're at a crossroads between not being sued, trying to look out for your friends, your family at all deaf, and also dealing with
I never knew that side of the business, and I even said, I was like, well, I'm like, some of these people have families, some of these people have like newborns. I'm like, you want me to go back and lie to them? And they're like, yeah, that's exactly what we want you to do. Welcome to business. It was like my first taste of oh, this is what that shit's like. Like, it was just because if it was if it was something, I mean, that's a shitty situation anyway. But the fact that all these people were my friends and family, and I've been around them forever. It's yeah, that was tough.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, man. I can't. I mean, I've never been that. So,
yeah.
But I think for you, I know that was probably to your point, a huge, downtime for you. Like to your point earlier, you there was ebbs and flows, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
you're at a pretty low time, dealing with this. What helped you kind of persevere, to make the next steps?
So after All Def, well, I actually negotiated the sale to TI and those guys, and after that was done, I just took some downtime just because I didn't want. It was kind of like a breakup at that point. All Def was my family, my baby. I really gave everything for that company, and so I took 3 months off. I actually got therapy just to clear my head, because that was a pretty traumatic experience, and I didn't want to take it. It's like having a bad relationship. I didn't want to take the stress of that relationship to my next relationship. And mental health shouldn't be a dirty word. Once you get above the age of 30, I feel like everyone should get therapy, because at that point you've at least experienced life, and people shouldn't be afraid or embarrassed to talk things out with a trained professional. Because I mean, that's kind of the thing that I wouldn't say saved me, but it allowed me, because that was the first time ever throughout everything in my life that I was okay, this actually has broken me a little bit, because I just didn't see it come in. And when you're handed something and you're like, oh shit, this is a great opportunity, you realize you're the fall guy. And so all the time you've been preaching and trying to tell people that everything's gonna be fine, and it's oh fuck, I was lied to, and you pawned everything off of me, so these people will be mad at me, not you. It kind of fucks with me. And then I started getting emails from I got email from Diddy at Revolt, Tidal reached out to me, Viacom, Warner, all these people were look, we heard what happened, and look, I just want you to know, no one thinks this is badly on you. You're one of the hardest working people we've known, blah, blah, blah. And if people were this upset that the company's gone, it must have mean that you were doing something right. So that that kind of built me up, and I just knew that the next job that I wanted to do, I wanted to go to a proper, I didn't want all the pressure on me anymore. I wanted to go to a system. I wanted to groom, I mean, inching my way closer and closer to the music system. Okay, first I was writing about rappers. Then I was making content about rappers.
Yeah.
Now I was I want to actually go into a label system and learn the inner mechanics of of being on the inside. And so that's what led me to Republic. I mean, throughout my All Def days, we had this big original content deal. So every month we would go to different labels and make content with the artists. And so, sorry, with when I was talking to all the labels, me and Monty Littman always just had a great relationship. And so when
Right.
even when and the crazy thing is like when All Def was like kind of going down, Monty was like, yo, why don't you come work for me? I was like, look, I'm loyal to these people. If I leave, like they're gonna be without jobs. And like he was trying to get me earlier, but I was just deadly loyal to All Def. And so once it was over, I was like, cool, let's go. And so that's how I ended up at Republic.
Dope. Okay. I think also to your point, speaks to the testament of just you, and your hard work based
Yeah,
off the relations of, across the labels. But to your point, just taking a break, you talked about mental health um, uh, being something that we need to be comfortable with talking about. Through all the experiences you had from, moving to LA, all the
yeah,
ups and downs and kind of the challenges and adversities you dealt with in your mid-20s, and then also just kind of speeding up to be this CEO and put in this position where you're responsible for other people's lives. Not saying that you wanted to be there, but you were kind of like you had to be there,
yeah,
given the circumstances, and you made it. You try to make it work as much as you could, given what was against you. And I think it's important that before you move to your next journey, your next chapter, that you were able to like really just talk through it, walk through all those experiences. So because you get caught up in just the motion of it, and you
yeah.
can't really reflect
And
on
for
what
and for me, like yeah, for me it was like looking back, no one succeeds without failing, and like that I'm happy that I got that under my belt, just because like any company, like Diddy got fired, Russell, Jay, like all these, like everyone has to go through this, and like a loss is only a loss if you don't learn anything from it. And like even looking back, like there's things that I learned from that going back I would do different, whether it be just when you're in a leadership role, how important is communication, and like not like speaking to an audience and telling them, like being not upfront, but just keeping them in the loop a little bit more, and like
right.
just not trying to, like, even as for a business model, like we went from doing original content to saying like, oh, now we're doing original content, we're doing merch, we're doing SVOD, and because I mean, it didn't help that at the same time when digital media was fucking dying, like
Hmm.
Vice went from like a $6 billion company to now they're worth like 300 million. So like digital was dying. It was a wrong place, wrong time. But like, yeah, it was a great learning lesson, and I wouldn't change it. I mean, to go from the head of social to CEO in 5 years, that's a hell of a ride with no college degree.
you, you got to think that moment where you start looking at those social media
Yeah,
roles.
yeah, for literally sitting on LinkedIn. No, it hit me when I updated my LinkedIn profile to be CEO of All Def. I was like, fam, 6 years ago, I made this fake LinkedIn account, and now this is all real experience.
Crazy.
Yeah,
And at the end of the day, like even though you kind of built up these opportunities, you made the most of it, right? With each
yeah,
time, whether you were at full screen, you made sure you were the first one in, the last one out. Same thing goes with All Def. You started as the head of socials, worked your way up, created opportunities where you're the head of marketing. You have a small budget, make the best South
yeah,
by Southwest party and experience, and now you get elevated to head of music. Next challenge, now you have to like salvage the company. It didn't
yeah,
necessarily work out, but you learn from that, and now you take all those experiences, to really to guide, the folks at Republic on the next stage of the way they approach content, and just levels of it, right? Just
yeah.
all
I
levels.
mean, and it's kind of cool too, just because like for me, damn it, I'm getting flummy. Sorry.
That's
For
all
me,
right.
like when I was at All Def, like you had to hunt for your food. Like the year when I became chief digital officer, to make sure that we didn't close that year, I closed $12 million with the business myself. And so like going to like, and that's like I sold some shows at Facebook, and like and that's me with no experience in anything. And so
What was that
like,
like? Like, what was that like? Like having those conversations with those brands,
well, I mean,
trying.
a big chunk of it was the $5 million deal to UMG, and like that's where I got a great relationship with Lucian and Jeff, and like
Mhm.
they just believed, and it's like, look, like we believe in you, and like we believe that all deaf and people who think like you are going to make us look more innovative and blah blah blah. So we'll give you a chance. I mean, I also got signed by CA for representation.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
yeah. So yeah, in like 1 year, all this shit was happening. So and for me, like I never knew that the finances were so bad. And then the board like literally told me 2 months before, like, hey, just let you know, there's probably $500,000 left. I'm like, you know what? Like that's crazy. Like, um, so yeah,
No, it's one of those things where I think to your point, you had to learn about corporate finance. It wasn't anything in your in your terms of learning, and obviously you didn't necessarily study that in college, but the fact that you had the appetite to like having to learn that, be in a position where when you're in those situations, the confidence
yeah,
to talk, because you may not necessarily know all the facts, but having the confidence to like relay your message, you may not necessarily know all the financial terms and so forth, but
oh yeah.
the
I forgot
confidence
what I
to
was
say like,
gonna say.
hey,
I didn't finish my point. Like, so going to the Republic now, I'm not having all that burden on my back. Where I'm like,
right,
cool. Like if I don't have to sell every piece of revenue for this company to go on, and I can kind of go back to learning and plugging into a bigger system again, and like really doing some cool stuff. So that's what I'm and having a great mentor again, because I mean Monty and that whole team over there. It's so every day I learn something new, and like I think I've said this before, but it's like going from a double A college team to like the New England Patriots, because it just I have that same feeling of being like not insecure but like hungry again.
hmm no, 100%. I think for you, it also just being able to not have the bearing of all that responsibility, but also to be
Yeah,
able to learn and really do your job, and also you know kind of retract a little bit, like actually learn some of the things
yeah,
with because you fast track so quickly,
exactly.
right? And kind of fill in the gaps of the things that you may have skipped as you kind of
Yeah, I
grew in
mean,
those.
especially when you're young, like it's just you learn exactly what you said. You miss so much, and like even me at 32, as opposed to when I was 29, like I'm just a lot more calmer. Like back then, like I was highly not emotional, but like because so much pressure was on me, like highly reactive, I guess you could say. And
Right.
so like and when it comes to social interactions and shit like that, and like reading great, like learning your emotional intelligence and like just fly off and people skills and all that shit, like that was kind of like the best thing I learned about the all deaf situation is like even though it was shitty, it could have been less shittier if I had the higher emotional intelligence just to react with people and had those skill sets and all that stuff to just be a better communicator and like yeah.
Yeah, no, it takes experience. I mean, I think emotional intelligence isn't something you learn overnight, right? Being able to manage personalities, and also manage emotions in terms of circumstances that may not necessarily end to your favor, right?
Yeah.
You can be in a situation where, um, because at the end of the day, people have to report to someone, and someone has to take the fall. Someone has to take, whether it's the win or the L.
Yeah.
You have to. You're the one to make those decisions, and you're the one, obviously, to ultimately get blamed for these things. And I mean, it's a lot of pressure, and it doesn't necessarily, people don't, you can't go to school for these things. You have to experience
Yeah.
it yourself.
I
So
mean,
leadership.
it's also one of those things where it's like that's not to sound like a douchebag, but that's the cost to be a boss. Like, I mean, and no one else is gonna because I remember like and also my time at All Def made me reflect on because even when I was back at the head of music or head of marketing, I'd be like, man, like they're doing everything wrong. I don't. It's like when you're a kid and you don't understand how like the world works, and then when I was in that shoe, I'm like, oh fuck, like that's why they did things like this. Like oh like it just I and like to get that experience at 32 as opposed to 40 or 50 like most CEOs are like I wouldn't change anything about that. It was a great experience and like I made some great friends, lost a few along the way, but yeah,
No, I appreciate you sharing your story about that, because I think for anyone that may know you, has a better, just more context as to like what you were dealing with at the time,
yeah,
and a lot of people may just see or read things about you, but I think for them to really understand what you were going through is important, just to contextualize, you
yeah,
know, that experience, which with anybody. It doesn't matter how experienced you are in terms of leadership. That's a lot to deal
Yeah,
with.
I mean that's one of the things that after all death, like instead of like going on a campaign to cry about how I was victimized and how it was wrong, I decided that look, I'm gonna my actions are gonna speak louder than my words, and that's I mean half the people that when all death was shut down, like I helped them find new jobs, and even though they were the people that were saying some of the bad things, it's like look, I can understand that some people were hurt just because I was hurt. And I was the CEO, so like having that opportunity to have a little bit of empathy from my side, like even when people do some negative things to you, like it takes a bigger person just to see through that and see that people they're doing that because they're hurt, they're doing that because they're confused, they're doing that just because they actually cared about the company because that's the same way I felt. So it was a good like I said, good learning lesson.
Lesson learned.
Oh,
Big lesson learned.
big
So big L's, man. But Chris, man, this was super dope. I appreciate you taking the time to like really share your story, your upbringing. I really enjoyed it just to really get to know
you
you,
know the real me now.
get to know you more intimately. We'll all know you intimately.
Yeah.
And appreciate you just like supporting the Digilogue and you doing the panel last time and
Anything you
um,
guys ever need, like you guys, like I said, you guys are people need to have stuff like this just because they need to be informed of how the world, I mean, the system really works, but then also be inspired to know that, like, look, you don't have to take the traditional route. You don't have to follow the rules. You don't have to, when things get bad, realize that it's going to come up, but then it's also going to go down sometimes. And like, I really love it. I say this every time I talk to you, but I love this platform. I love what you guys are doing. And anything I can ever do that help, you know.
nah, we appreciate that, man. And then when with a lot of our guests before we wrap up, we always ask. We talked about a lot else. I mean,
Yeah.
you gave us a whole list of like lessons learned.
Yeah.
From let me just retract real quick. Go review. So
You wrote
like
these down. Okay.
you going to LA 21 with 2K in your account with a bag, you figuring things out, right? You go into this agency, learning the ropes there, understanding that's not the world for you. Making it work for, in terms of being a quote unquote social media strategist, creating that LinkedIn profile, creating the connections, whatever it took. Going to that interview 3 times to prove yourself with full screen, and eventually waking up super early to make sure you're the first person at the office and last person to leave. And then because of that hard work, people really leaning in, supporting you, to be in the position where you get a call from Russ, Christmas Eve, to tell him to
Hearing
ask you to
someone
work
else say it sounds so much crazier than when I say it to myself.
and offered this job to be head of social. And then 5 years later, to be in a position where you're CEO of the company, trying to salvage the company and raise money to stay afloat. And now leading content strategy for Republic. So hell of a track record. I know there's gonna be a lot of lessons learned, but from all that, what's probably the biggest lesson learned for you that you want to share with the Digilogue community?
So I'll give two. One's is on the come up. When you're coming up, like I always said, like promotions aren't made between 9 and 5. Like be the hardest. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but be the hardest working. Like if you ask anyone at any of one of the companies I ever worked for, people, that's one thing they can never take from me is like how hard I work for something. And then I guess once you're in somewhere, don't get comfortable. Don't think that don't think that you're going to be in that place forever. And then once you get to the top, just learn to have an emotional intelligence and learn to when to lash out, when to listen sometimes more when you talk, and like let people feel that they're a part of a system, because no matter how star of a player you are, if you don't have a strong team around you, and like even though Michael Jordan was not to even compare myself to Michael Jordan, but even though Michael Jordan was an asshole, he still gave his credit to Scottie Pippen. He still motivated the team around them to be better people, and you can't just do it all by yourself. So
100%, man. I mean, those are big lessons learned. But appreciate you, Chris, man. Episode 13 of the L's, aka Lessons Learned. Make sure for the community to follow Chris. We're gonna have his socials in the description. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, subscribe. Appreciate you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And for the Digilogue community, we have more episodes coming every Sunday. We got more content and programming. Appreciate all the support during COVID, and we'll be here for you to support you in all your creative endeavors. So, Chris, appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, fam.
All right, talk soon, guys.